What's up, guys, and welcome back to episode number 3 of the SX250 6-bar retro build. Episode number 1, we put the front end together, the handlebars, the headset, the stem, and the forks. Episode number 2, we put the tires and the tubes on the wheels, and then we put the wheels on the bike, and it's actually starting to come together and look like a bike. And in this episode, episode number 3, we're going to be putting the bottom bracket in, the spindle, the cranks, the sprocket, and the chain. For this part of the build, you're going to need 4 major components. You're going to need your cranks and your spindle. In this case, we're using 3-piece cranks, so we need the crank arms and the spindle. They all come separate. If you have a 2-piece cranks, your spindle is already connected to your drive side crank. You're going to need your bottom bracket and all the components that come with it. You're going to need your sprocket. Once you have all your components laid out and ready to put on your bike, the next thing to do is prepare all of the nuts and bolts that go in your bike. And what I mean by prepare is, I mean grease all of the bolts that are going to be put inside of your bike. What that grease does is, if you ever want to take those bolts off or change them or just service them, you're not going to be fighting to get them out. And also what that grease is going to do is it's going to prevent creaking in the future. I'm sure a lot of you have had that squeaky, creaky bottom bracket, and a lot of the times it's because that bottom bracket doesn't have any grease in it, or over time dirt has gotten in there and it's just grinding. Once it's doing that, it's time to take it off, clean it, and put some grease on it. 2 of the most important tools that you're going to need for this part of the build is a bottom bracket tool and a chain brake. What the bottom bracket tool does is, with this style bottom bracket, it fits perfectly in all these little threads. If you don't have this tool, what I used to do is very carefully wrap a rag around the top of this, screw it all the way in your frame, wrap that rag over the top, and put a pair of channel locks on there and twist it and tighten it. That way you don't scratch it all up and just tear it up. But that's last resort if you do not have a bottom bracket tool. And what a chain brake does, you see that little pin right there? You put your chain in here and you screw it, and it pushes the pin through your chain, and that way you can take it apart and take whatever links out of the chain that you may need for it to fit right. Now that I have grease on all the bolts that I put in my frame, I like to double up, put a little bit of grease on the inside of the bottom bracket. Just put a little bit on your finger and just like that. All right, everything's greased. First thing we're gonna wanna do is we're gonna put one side of the bottom bracket in. And what's important here is that both sides of the bottom bracket spin the same exact way. It's not lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. For the bottom bracket, both cups, if you're sitting on top of the bike to tighten them, they both spin backwards. So on the non-drive side, it's gonna be righty-tighty. And on the drive side, it's gonna be lefty-tighty. Kind of weird, but that's just how it is. All right, so the first one we're gonna do the drive side first. And like I said, on this one, it's gonna be lefty-tighty. Snug that down with our bottom bracket tool. Now we're ready to put our spindle in. What we're gonna do is we're gonna fish this through like that, and then we're gonna get our non-drive side bearing and tighten it in just like that. And this side is righty-tighty, unlike the other side that was lefty-tighty. This one bolt right here that goes into the crank that holds the sprocket on, I'm not gonna put grease on this because that's one bolt that you really don't want backing out, because you don't want your sprocket to break loose on you, because then you'd eat crap. This already has Loctite on it, so once it goes in there, it's gonna be hard to get out, and that's what you want. I'm not gonna tighten it too tight right now because we want it to be loose, so that way we can line it up when we put it on the spindle. Cranks are on, the sprocket's on, spins nice and free. I haven't tightened them down all the way yet because I still have to check the chain alignment. I know people have their certain ways of checking the chain alignment, but my favorite thing to do is get an old chain and put it over the sprockets and just eyeball down the chain alignment to make sure that your chain is nice and aligned. You don't want it to be like this or like this, because then your chain will slip off of one of those gears and that's not a good day. So what I like to do, put my end of my chain through here, put it on the back teeth, spin it all the way until you get to the front teeth, put a lot of tension on it, and now you can see your chain alignment straight through here. Make sure it's nice and straight, no binding at all. Spins nice and smooth. These bolts right here, you don't want to over tighten them, you just want to get them nice and snug enough where your cranks don't have play and they spin freely. But these ones right here, you're going to want to tighten them down a good bit. Alignment's good, everything's tight. Now it's time to put on the chain. Chain is on, cranks are on, everything's fully tightened. When I put a brand new chain on, I like to keep it pretty tight. This is a little too tight, but I like to keep it a little tighter than normal because they do stretch and they do break in, and then you have to go back and retighten it. So I like to tighten it just a little extra, so that way the first couple gates it's not super loose and I can just get a full session in without having to go back and tighten it. Last thing to do on this drivetrain is put some flat pedals on. And of course you guys know I'm rocking the Pedaling Innovations Catalyst pedals, always. Alright guys, that's all for today. We got the drivetrain all put together, the cranks, the bottom bracket, the gear, the chain, the pedals. We need to put some grips on there, we need to put a seat, and then last but not least, the brakes. So that's what we're gonna do on next episode. We're gonna finish this bike off and then we're gonna take it to the track, test it out, and hopefully I'm a good enough mechanic and this thing does not fall apart. Thank you guys for stopping and hanging out with me for another episode of the SX250 Retro Build. That's all folks, and I'll see you next week.